Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? We'll begin with news on the CCP virus. Specifically, that there appears to be a pathway between the nose and into the brain. This would support past evidence of neurological symptoms and injury from infection with the CCP virus. The data is based on initial analysis of 33 autopsies conducted with those who appear to have died from the CCP virus. This further reinforces the fact that there are more issues at play here than just the acute infection. Rather, what are the possible long-term issues? Understand that the brain and certain other parts of the body are protected from even the immune system itself to an extent. They are isolated and protected to ensure that nothing can cause harm. Well, one of the ways it does this is the blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier, though, is not perfect. Some pathogens, and for the most part these are viruses, either are small enough to sneak through or are able to take advantage of various receptors on the blood-brain barrier, get through and infect the neurons within your brain. The idea that the virus could be infecting your brain shouldn't be a surprise. One of the earliest and most easily identified symptoms is a loss of smell. The fact that you have both a loss of smell based on your nose and your brain would make more sense than just damage to one section. The researchers found DNA, or more accurately viral RNA, in the various parts of the nose, the upper part of the nose, and in the brain. This means that they can show where the virus has been traveling from and to, and what it has infected. Obviously, being infected is one thing, and those who are need to be treated. What is interesting is a case study of a baby born with antibodies to the CCP virus after their mother had contracted the virus while pregnant. The virus was contracted when the child was only 10 weeks into development. This was very early on. This is also in the earliest days of the infection spread across the world. The benefit of this is that the child has developed immunity. One of the interesting questions will be, how long will the immunity last for? The ongoing immunity is likely to be reinforced by lactation from the mother. Assuming she's breastfeeding, the milk will contain various antibodies that are necessary for the child to retain some degree of immunity. Research has shown that the milk from mothers who have been infected by COVID-19 will offer some protection to newborn infants. California has just broken a record with regards to the CCP virus, something that they may not be so pleased with. They now have more people in hospital with the CCP virus than at any time since America began dealing with this as a pandemic. It's been said repeatedly that there should be concern about overwhelming the medical system. Early on, when the outbreak wasn't as severe during the first wave, this was considered an alarmist and extreme response, many people wanting others to audit their hospital, to ensure that when hospitals were claiming that they were experiencing surges in capacity demand, that they really were. Well, as we're now seeing during the second wave, in which there is a far higher infection rate, that is exactly what has happened. The initial concerns have been entirely vindicated time and again. The problem with this is very simple. Looking at that first wave, no medical service thought that they would be ready to deal with it as it was. Therefore, they've increased their capacity. The problem is, even with that increase in capacity, they aren't able to deal because they could not predict such an increase, such a surge in the number of infected who would need hospitalization. In California alone, there are over 7,400 patients due to the CCP virus alone. That is an increase of over 5,000 in about a month. At the start of November, the Los Angeles County itself was seeing about 30 people a day die from the CCP virus. There was a statewide average now of 75 per day. This has naturally given rise to rumours that the government is looking to reinstate the strictest of lockdown measures. There has then of course been pushback, both from business and those who don't wish to re-enter the most stringent of circumstances. This creates a bit of a problem. On one hand, it has been demonstrably successful in other countries. In America, less so. There's also the issues of people's ability to simply pay for their basic lifestyle necessities, rent, food, utilities, and so on, and all the more leading up to Christmas. Then you need to consider whether or not the short-term pain of a lockdown is worth the long-term benefits of eventually being able to, if not eradicate, at least curtail the spread of the CCP virus. California might be trying to give North Dakota a run for its money. We recently reported, in fact, a little under 2 weeks ago, that they had a death rate of 1 in 1,000 people who lived in North Dakota. That is 1 in every 1,000 people in that state. That number has now risen, and uncomfortably so, to 1 in every 800. That is, 1 in every 800 people in North Dakota has died due to the CCP virus. That's a huge surge in just under 2 weeks. Since bringing in a mask mandate, there appears to have been a slight decrease in the numbers. There's been a 38% decrease in the number of cases over the past 2 weeks. There have been a 19% decrease in the number of deaths and 16% decrease in the number of hospitalizations. The mask mandate is one thing, but remember, this may be undone by similar events as to what was seen in China, where massive movement of people for the Lunar New Year, and in this case Thanksgiving, could have led to a significant uptick in the number of people spreading the virus. Where America should be concerned about people spreading the virus, Denmark has to worry about minks. We've mentioned how they've had to begin culling them because they became infected and then could reinfect humans. Denmark has had a minor hiccup with this, as it seemed every country trying to implement either quarantine or control of the spread of the CCP virus has. Over 100 infected minks have escaped. This is a problem for many reasons. The first and simplest is, if the minks manage to infect other animals in the wild, it could create a reservoir for the virus in the wild. Think about how other coronaviruses, such as SARS, crop up every now and then. The reason this occurs, very simply, is that animals in the wild have the virus. Eventually, they infect a human host who begins spreading it. The last thing we want, especially from Denmark, is to have the virus infect an animal in the wild, establish a wild reservoir where it could keep coming back in Europe. The reason this has occurred is relatively simple. Every year, despite best efforts, some of the animals in the mink fur industry escape. The problem is this time round, they're concerned that at least 5% of these animals could have been infected with the CCP virus. This means that of the thousands that have gotten out, it's possible that a fraction of these could then have the virus and could then either pass it on to other minks or onto other animals. Another significant concern is that even if the virus does not infect other animals, in and of itself, it might mutate. Mutations are a bigger concern, if only because they may cause harm or undermine the attempts to vaccinate people. Giving rise to a new mutant version of the CCP virus is a concern in that it could either become more infectious, increase mortality, or, as said, actively undermine efforts to vaccinate people. Think what would happen if the influenza virus was crossed with the CCP virus. We would have something that changes every year and require both planning and preparation to roll out a large-scale enough vaccination program to try and mitigate it. And we already have enough trouble with the influenza viruses each year, let alone trying to add a second disease to that list. We've mentioned what happens if the medical service struggles, and Alberta is currently in exactly that situation. They've now had to ask federal government, the Red Cross, and other agencies to provide them with field hospitals. That is effectively a tent designed to be a hospital. It may also be something as complex as a portable building, but the point is, they've literally had to request ad hoc hospitalization facilities because they are overwhelmed by the CCP virus caseload. This was exactly the point we were making with California. These Canadians claim it's purely preparation for an extreme scenario, and that makes sense. You then need to wonder what sort of extreme scenario they're expecting when they currently have 8,500 beds available in 100 hospitals. If they expect they can dedicate about a quarter to a third of these purely to CCP virus patients, then what exactly is going to happen? At the moment, of the roughly 2,200 beds, 500 are being used. That means there's 1,800 still available, and they still think it's necessary to put a contingency in place to have field hospitals on hand. At least part of Canada is predicting and strongly anticipating that they're going to have a lot of problems. This may be based on the American situation, where the CCP virus is ballooning and growing out of hand. That's enough doom and gloom for one video. Let's now look at an interesting case study. Of all the things you can do with your spare time, finding ways to change the color of your urine may not be the most productive, but it's certainly educational, especially when you start looking into pharmacology. One hospitalized male had to consider exactly this when his urine turned a green color. Green may not be the most accurate term for it. It's almost the color of pea soup. Why this happened is, at least initially, a mystery, and why he went to the hospital. It turns out the 62-year-old man had a number of conditions, one of them being chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. After having breathing difficulty for several days, he went to the hospital and his blood level indicated that he had a high level of carbon dioxide in his blood. He was then put into an intensive care unit, put on a ventilator, and given an anesthetic. The anesthetic was called propofol. This appears to have been what caused the man's urine to change color. As we've mentioned, there are a variety of medications and drugs you can take which change the color of your urine and other bodily secretions. One of the things in this case was that the propofol is, at least in most cases, used for general anesthesia. It's commonly used because it's well tolerated. But in rare cases, as is the case here, it can turn urine green. While not exactly understood, it's currently thought that metabolic products from the breakdown of the propofol can go into the kidneys and be excreted in urine. These metabolites could well be what causes that green coloration by differentially diffracting the light in a particular way, meaning we see green light but not others. It was clearly established that it was indeed this anesthetic that caused it, because once they took the propofol away, his urine went back to a normal color. In other weird news, although this one may be slightly more pleasant for those who are environmentally conscious, laboratory-grown meat in the form of chicken is going to be available at last. For people who are concerned about, among other things, animal welfare, the environmental impact, and so on, the availability of a laboratory-grown meat may be very enticing. It will begin being sold as a chicken nugget, which is something of an irony as most chicken nuggets appear to contain very little chicken, and having a laboratory-grown chicken substitute, while fitting with the idea, doesn't really fit with the label. One of the big limiting factors with any of this laboratory-grown meat has been that in order to make a meat-type product, rather than a plant-based product that looks like meat, you have to spend a lot of money. The company behind this product, called Eat Just, has said that they anticipate that their chicken will be available at a price point very similar to buying premium chicken at a high-end restaurant. We do not think he means McDonald's when he says high-end restaurant. That would make sense, since in the long term, they intend to bring the cost down, either through volume and sales or more efficient methods, to below that of conventionally grown chicken. Going now from animal news that might make you happy to animal news that will make you squirm, scientists can confirm that the small brown spider, known as the false widow spider, have at least some basis behind these stories that it can cause skin infections and necrosis. The false widow spider appeared in the United Kingdom in the 1870s, most likely a product of globalization and the empire, and bringing in shipments from the African coast. Since then, it has spread right throughout the United Kingdom and into Ireland. One of the concerns with this is that people who have encountered it and been bitten by it appear to have unexpected reactions. And with so many people being home at the moment, the number of encounters has increased. This has naturally led to a rise in the concerns about those who are bitten. What you should be concerned about is not the venom that it injects, rather the introduction of foreign pathogens in the form of bacteria. The false widow's fangs have bacteria on them, and as they're quite large fangs, they pierce through the skin, going into the living part of the tissue where there's a blood supply. This means that those large holes are a very hospitable place for bacteria to get into you. This is the first issue that's presented. The second issue is that even if the spider itself does not introduce pathogens in the form of bacteria, you more than likely will. Your skin is home to many bacteria. Most of them won't cause you any trouble. The problem occurs when they are given opportunity to create trouble, something like a hole in your skin from a spider bite. This creates one problem. The bigger problem goes back to the spider. It would appear that the bacteria that make home on the spider's fang tend to be more likely to have medication-resistant status than those on your own skin. This means, in general, the bacteria from the spider are more dangerous, and since they're introduced in such an aggressive way, it can create more problems. Fortunately, the degree and nature of how many bacteria and just which medications they're resistant to would indicate that they're unlikely to be the primary source of medication-resistant bacteria. But still, one concern among all the others when it comes to the things that creep and crawl. Next, we need to talk about the Arecibo telescope, and, well, frankly, disappointing news. For the last few weeks, we've spoken about how they first tried to shore it up and preserve it so it could continue to be used. Then they decided that it really wasn't going to be able to be recovered. This meant that they would have to take it down slowly but surely in a safe manner. Well, now we need to report that rather than being able to recover it, repair it, or solely dismantle it in a safe way, it has had a catastrophic failure. The large receiver has collapsed and fallen into the dish, destroying it. The receiver is a 900-ton structure, held above it about 140 meters above it. That means we have a 900-ton mass dropping 140 meters into a not exactly substantial dish. You can imagine just how much damage this caused. This is a rather ignoble end to the Arecibo telescope, given its more than 57 years of service and operation. In that time, it has been responsible for some of the more interesting successes and discoveries. This includes the first exoplanet outside our own solar system. The final piece of news is one of strangeness and oddity. That monolith we mentioned last week in the Utah desert has disappeared just as mysteriously as it appeared. Authorities are taking this in stride and have issued a public statement which reads in part, "Although we can't comment on active investigations, the Bureau of Land Management would like to remind public land visitors that using, occupying, or developing the public lands or their resources without a required authorization is illegal, no matter what planet you are from." This is all the more relevant when you consider that the Bureau itself are not responsible for the removal of the monolith installation. That's all the news we have for you this week. Thank you for watching. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions you might have below